about CCU of the day. This morning we set the ground about carbon capture and utilization, and now we're going to discuss some examples from the field, and we have a very interesting speaker. I'm Celia Sapar, Director of Communications and Climate Science at CO2 Value Europe. We are the European Association representing the CCU community, and I will be your moderator today. So this session will include 4 talks, and then at the end, a Q&A session. So feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and the speakers might already come to answer your question there, and we will keep the more general questions for the discussions at the end. For your information, all the material will be available on the website afterwards, so you will be able to see it. And this event is being recorded, and the material will be, as I said, on the website later. But now it's time to start with the first example of CCU applications. So I will give the word to Babette Peterson, Vice President Europe at LanzaTech. And Babette will discuss how they use captured carbon to create value, to create chemicals out of it. So Babette, please, you can share your screen.
Thank you, Celia. Let me just check if I can share the screen first before.
It's
make sure
good. Yeah,
you can see it in full screen.
Yeah,
can you see the screen, Celia?
All good.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunch. I'd like to thank Paul Stewart for the opportunity to speak at Bio360 today, and Celia for moderating this session. I heard her this morning in the CCU session, and as she said, it was interesting, lots to discuss. As we heard from Michael Karras in the CCU session this morning, one of the key challenges we face is to replace the demand for fossil carbon with alternative carbon sources. So I'm going to speak to you this afternoon about how LanzaTech captures carbon from waste and creates value by locking this carbon into chemicals and fuels. At the core of our process, as you can see here, is a bioreactor. It's all about synthetic biology, and we have a naturally occurring organism, which was at the foundation invention back 15 years ago, which is able to capture carbon from gaseous sources and produce ethanol. This obviously is the biocatalyst, and the scope of our process includes the cleanup of the gases, compression, fermentation of gases, separation and storage. Our source of feedstocks is, as I said before, waste, and we started out using industrial off-gases from industries like steel, which are rich in carbon monoxide, hydrogen, as well as carbon dioxide. The carbon from those gases is captured in the process, metabolized by the organisms to produce ethanol. We, as a licensing business model, have also developed a broad range of feedstocks that are obviously abundant, low cost and point source, and have moved from industrial off-gases to include also the gasification of municipal solid waste, other agricultural waste, plastics waste, and even wood to offer our licensees a broad range of feedstocks for use in this process. And as we go forward, and as we heard this morning, we continue to develop the feedstocks at the front end of the process, not only off gases from industry, starting with carbon monoxide, but also carbon dioxide going forward as green hydrogen becomes more available and at an economic price point, and the same thing for electrolyzers. While we've been working on the front end with different feedstocks, we've been developing applications, starting out the first application for LanzaTech's ethanol was transport fuels. And as you can see on the top right-hand side there, really sustainable aviation fuels. The ethanol is converted in a proprietary process to jet fuel and diesel fuel, is currently being used for road transport where it's blended with gasoline. In the middle there, we have one byproduct, which is actually the spent biomass, which is very rich in protein, and in our plant in China is sold as animal feed. And on the bottom right-hand side there, we have developed with our ethanol platform a host of chemicals with downstream partners, including polyethylene, polyester, as well as direct applications for the ethanol. And as you can see on the top right there in the light green button with 2.0, we have a whole family of biocatalysts, a whole family of microorganisms. And while the first one really focuses on ethanol, and we've developed that downstream as a platform for chemicals and fuels, our second, third, and fourth microbes actually can produce chemicals directly, chemicals like acetone, isopropyl alcohol, and monoethylene glycol. And so in some cases we see here, we can actually contribute to the circular economy, because in the case of polymers, those actually go back into the waste streams when they are recycled and can be used to feed the process. This is an example of the plant in China. Of course, it sounds fairly conceptual to take carbon from gases and turn it into products, but this is not a concept. We've been operating at commercial scale in China since 2018 and have produced over 20 million gallons of ethanol in this plant to date and mitigated over 100,000 tons of CO2. We've also had the plant certified by the Roundtable for Sustainable Biomaterials. And as those of you who are familiar with this process, you'll know it's not just about greenhouse gas emissions, but lots of other key aspects of the process. And we, of course, plan to continue to certify every aspect of our process with third-party experts. This is going to be the first European plant. It will be in Belgium, in Ghent, in partnership with ArcelorMittal. It's been the subject of several Horizon 2020 projects. On the bottom right there, you see both Steelanol, which is the LanzaTech technology for the capture of the carbon from the steel off gases, and the Torero project, which is the use of torrefied wood as a feedstock to the process. So some of the coal is being replaced with torrefied wood, which means that the output here, differently to the China plant, this plant is both larger with a capacity of over 60,000 metric tons, and the ethanol that's produced will also be certified as bioethanol based on the feedstock being used, being torrefied wood. And the estimated savings of CO2 a year is over 350,000 metric tons. This plant will be complete, mechanically complete this year, and will be producing bioethanol next year in 2022. Beyond the steel gases, as I showed in the first slide, we've been developing a range of other feedstocks, and this is an example of the work that LanzaTech has done with Sekisui in Japan, working with them since 2014, so over 50,000 hours of operation to demonstrate that our technology can actually convert the carbon from the syngas from unsorted municipal solid waste to produce ethanol. And based on this work, Sekisui has decided to scale up and commercialize the ethanol, and they've partnered with Sumitomo Chemical, who will use that ethanol to produce carbon smart polyolefins. So we're building a series of plants as we speak. I've talked about the ArcelorMittal plant, the steel off gases in Belgium, the steel plant in China. There is a second plant that will be complete in China this year from ferroalloy off gases, and a third plant in China next year. Sekisui, I spoke about in Japan. We have two projects in India, one with refinery off gases with Indian Oil, and another one with another Indian oil company, MRPL, who are using agricultural waste and an anchor gasifier to produce ethanol. We're also working in South Africa with Swayana on ferroalloy off gases, and in Europe with NextChem using plastics waste as a feedstock for the process. So we continue to build out experience and operations with these different feedstocks. So as I said, ethanol really is our first platform. We've been building that one both for fuels and for chemicals. And on the left-hand side here, you'll see a Virgin Atlantic plane. And in 2019, one of those flights from Orlando to London was using LanzaTech's certified ASTM fuel to fly across the Atlantic safely. And you see in the picture there, Richard Branson and our CEO, Jennifer Holmgren. Of course, the point about this slide is that we have not done this on our own. The bottom shows all the different partners that we've been working with to develop the technology. On the left-hand side, those are the partners for the sustainable aviation fuel. And on the right-hand side, some of the partners that we've worked with in terms of chemicals and polymers. This is just an example of the process that LanzaTech developed to take the ethanol produced from the process into jet and diesel fuel. as you can see, this process actually builds on ethanol and can use not only the carbon smart ethanol from the LanzaTech process, but any other source of sustainable ethanol, because the demand for sustainable aviation fuels is so high. This is just a quick example of the timeline for commercial deployment of those aviation fuels. Last year in 2020, LanzaTech spun off a company called LanzaJet with investment from Suncor, Mitsui, All Nippon Airlines, and most recently British Airways, to actually scale up and commercialize the sustainable aviation fuel, starting out at our Freedom Pines biorefinery in the US, and moving forward with a Horizon 2020 sponsored project called Flight in Europe and other areas over time. We have many projects, as you can imagine. The ones we can talk about here are the ones that have been publicly announced. And about 3/4 of the way through last year, the first sort of consumer goods product using LanzaTech's Carbon Smart ethanol was launched on the market. This is from the retail group Micro and their Mebel group product line of household cleaning products and detergents. And as you can see here, they have labeled these products as being based on recycled carbon dioxide. And the feedback that we have is that consumers have been reacting to these very positively. I know that Michael and the RCI initiative are working on carbon labeling as well, but this is first indication of positive feedback. We've also worked downstream with partners like Total and L'Oréal, and announced towards the end of last year the first cosmetic plastic bottle made from carbon emissions, actually steel gas emissions from China in this particular case, where the ethanol from LanzaTech was taken by Total and converted to ethylene and polymerized to polyethylene for L'Oréal's packagers to produce these plastic bottles that L'Oréal will be using for their shampoo line and their hair care line to meet their carbon reduction targets in the coming years. And most recently, some of you might have seen that we announced a partnership with Coty that have a very broad range of fine fragrances, luxury perfume brands, and they made the choice to replace all their ethanol in these fine fragrances with the carbon smart ethanol from industrial emissions. And just one additional point is we've been working on that, taking that carbon smart ethanol and converting it, as you can see on the left-hand side here, with different partners to monoethylene glycol, which can be used by polyester producers to produce either packaging like bottles or textiles from carbon smart polyester. And on the right-hand side here, what you can see is we build out these applications beyond ethanol and downstream products. This is some work that's funded by the Department of Energy in the US, where we're taking waste apparel and packaging from a brand called Lululemon, with the help of waste management, collecting that, gasifying the waste with Inentech, and using the LanzaTech process to ferment the carbon from those gases to monoethylene glycol for the production of PET, to really close the loop there and contribute to the circular economy. So our dream has been from the start is that consumers will actually be able to choose where the carbon in their products comes from. And on the bottom there, as I said earlier, we've started with fuel, transport fuels, aviation fuels, ethanol directly for use in household products, as well as packaging, textiles, and plastics. And on the top there, we're really looking at the second generation microorganisms from LanzaTech to directly produce chemicals without going through the ethanol. So here we feel we can contribute to the circular economy. Obviously, in the case of fuels, there are emissions. However, those are reduced along with other emissions in that process by as much as 80% and more. On the left-hand side, however, when we lock the carbon into the products and those themselves are recycled, they can be reused and regenerated as part of the circular economy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Babette, for this very broad picture of what we can do with CO2 and waste. And I think it's really sure that we can do mostly everything. So it's a very encouraging message as well. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion with you at the end of this session. So do not hesitate to the participant to ask your question in the chat. But thanks a lot, Babette. It was really great.
Thank you, Celia.
So now I would like to give the word to Dr. Anshu Mathur, who is Deputy General Manager, Bioenergy at the DBT IOC Center for Advanced Bioenergy Research. Dr. Anshu will discuss about how to create high-value chemicals, feed and fuels out of CO2. So Dr. Anshu, I'll let you share your screen, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, it's all good.
Yeah. Good afternoon to all fellow panelists, the organizers, particularly Paul Stewart, and the audience for presenting me this opportunity, where I will be just picking on the carbon dioxide to fuel, feed, and high-value chemicals, which is another example where we have partnered with the LanzaTech, and we have developed a process for using our IOCL algae strain to create fuel, feed, and high-value chemicals. The agenda. The agenda for the presentation will be the overview how we can use the carbon dioxide for food and chemical production, with the background of technology development of LanzaTech's anaerobic microbial conversion step and the IOCL algal conversion step, and how we have integrated these two processes, and how is the scale up done, and what are the next steps, and open discussion. Carbon dioxide, I need not to say, amply clear in the previous presentation how useful and broadly available resource this has become in the recent times, and there are so many unique possibilities of exploiting this carbon dioxide. So the people are using carbon dioxide for a long time to produce the fuel, which is biodiesel, which is an alternative to the diesel and is blended in the diesel. But normally it is done by using the algae, which is the phototrophic algae, which is of course fast growing compared to the many plants. It is a cheap carbon source, but there are a lot of problems because it involves a process where sunlight is required, which has a efficiency of absorption. There's a low algae productivity. It requires a vast area, and there's a huge water requirement. And the cell and the biomass of the algae which is generated is so low that the harvesting becomes a problem. And so far, the economics are not very favorable. The other way to produce the biodiesel is people are using is to heterotrophic algae, where the closed systems can be used and where no sunlight is required. The growth is very fast with very high productivity. And in many algae, they produce the high lipid contents, high value lipid selectivity. And it is also because the cell density is very high, it is an easily harvesting process. But there are also issues with the heterotrophic algae because they cannot use sunlight. They require large amount of suitable cheap carbon source, and they require a strain which is highly productive and suitable to various types of carbon source. This algal oil in the heterotrophic mode can be economical if the carbon source is cheap and abundantly available. And therefore, there is a search to how to get this economically cheaper carbon source. The heterotrophic algae present and promising alternate for biodiesel. There are strains with the high lipid contents, fast growth requirements are there. The strains has to be robust. But even the best algal strain could not get the lipid or the biodiesel at a very high cost of 4 to 5 gallons per dollar. Strain, how are the strains? If you generate a strain which is co-producing high value lipids and chemicals, this can become a possible economic solutions. So in this regard, the algal strains which produces the omega fatty acids along with the lipids for the biodiesels can become a fine example of high value lipids. So our invention and the proof of concept is that we have isolated a novel microbe within the algae with large amount of lipids as well as the omega fatty acids. We have optimized this process for maximum algae productivity, which produces about 100 to 130 grams per liter of per day. The maximized lipid production 40 to 50% of the algae biomass, and the maximized DHA production of which can be 40 to 60% lipids. We have evaluated this process with several carbon sources which are available And though the proof of concept is established, the cost of carbon still remains the major economic concern. There we came into the contact with the Lazatec, where they have a carbon dioxide fermentation process where carbon dioxide is converted into the acetate, and this provided us a unique opportunity of a low-cost carbon source. Acetate utilization means the carbon dioxide mitigation, the production of biofuel, cross-subsidized by high-value omega-3 fatty acids. In the Lazatec process, if you see on the left side, there is the reaction between the carbon dioxide and hydrogen, in which the acetate gets produced along with the water. This acetate can be used by various organisms, including algae, yeast, and the bacteria, to produce various products which can be fuel, which can be feed and nutrition, which can be chemicals, and which can be pharmaceuticals. So this presented us with the advantages that it can be a small or large scale unit which can be established, and it can be decoupled production from oil and agriculture, and it can be deployed anywhere with a source of power, water, and the carbon dioxide. If we see the omega-3 fatty acids, the volume share forecast in metric tons is quite huge. It is projected to reach around 60 million tons in various applications of supplements of functional foods, pharmaceuticals, infant formula, and the any field by 2025. And it is also now very closely competing, if you see on the right side, very closely competing with the fish oil, which presents a number of problems. The microbial sources are becoming more and more popular and being developed. The other thing that this algae will produce is the biodiesel, and in the world production, we see the biodiesel is produced in a large amount, and in India also the fuel consumption is increasing, and we need a very high amount of biodiesel. The India biodiesel requirement is at the rate of 5% blending in the diesel is 5 billion liters. So both these things produce huge opportunity to develop and translate this process commercially. So there we joined hand with the Lazatec, and we developed an integrated process for CO2 to value-added products, where the acetate produced in the Lazatec fermentation process and our IOC algae strain produce the omega-3 fatty acids and the fatty acids which are for the biodiesel. So the significance of this integrated process lies in it provides a solution for utilization of greenhouse gases to foods and fuels. It is a cheap and enough carbon source available. It is a long-term sustainable process. And this process, as you will see in the later slides, minimize the use of the acid base. There is a lipid for biodiesel production and a high-value co-products as nutraceuticals and the pharmaceuticals can be produced using this. So as a first step, we got this bacterial culture from the Lazatec. It was transferred to the IOC, and we have replicated the total gas fermentation process for the conversion from carbon dioxide to acetate in our lab, and established the necessary setup of the reactors. And this process we have run continuously for 15 days to establish the exact replicacy what Lazatec process at Lazatec is there. So just to give some more background, this Lazatec process using carbon dioxide to acetate, the organisms other than the algae can be used like the yeast, but and in our process in the Lazatec, we use the algae to produce the lipids. The difference lies in the fact that when we use the yeast, we get only the biodiesel related fatty acids, which are mainly palmitic acid and the oleic acids. But in our case, when we integrate this process, as you see on the right hand side, we get in addition to the C16 and C18 fatty acids, we get the C22 and C23 omega acids, which provides the high industrial value to the whole process. So in a comparison and in a challenge to integrate this process, the Lazatec process is anaerobic. It's a totally anaerobic process. It cannot tolerate even traces of oxygen. It selectively produces acetic acid from the carbon dioxide. It uses a proprietary anaerobe the concentration of acetic acid is such that the extraction becomes uneconomical. And the another thing is that when the acetate is produced, the pH goes down, and a lot of alkali is needed to compensate for this pH. In the IOC process is totally aerobic. It needs oxygen. So the challenge is to link this anaerobic to the anaerobic process. And we have a microalgae, which is a fast growing productivity of 100 gram per liter per day, and produces about 40 to 60% total oil, and selectively produces omega acid, which is also represents 40 to 60% of total oil. And another thing is that in our process, the pH goes up. That means a lot of acid is needed. So in this integrated process, there is a very good opportunity of pH compensation, in which we very much reduce the requirement of alkali, costly alkali and the acid. So in the integrated process scheme, which has been established first in the lab, so there is an anaerobic anaerobic bioreactor suggested by the Lazatec, in which the acetic acid is produced. This acetic acid is uh, separated from the bacterial culture and the permeate goes into the aerobic lipid reactor. And this also has a cell retention, where we remove all the waters and the chemical recycle back to the VDI anaerobic LT bioreactor. This lipid reactor is then the product is recovered from that, which are the lipids and the biomass. And there is a in the aerobic lipid reactor, there is a carbon dioxide release. This carbon dioxide can also get recycled back and can be used in the anaerobic fermenter. So this lipid product accumulates with the algal cells, allowing for increase in the product titer through cell recycling. So this integrated process scheme was thoroughly established in the lab scale reactors, and based on that, we have now a pilot plant in the Indian Oil R&D Center, which is composing of 3 reactors. There is a reactor which is an anaerobic reactor, and then there are a algae growth reactor, and there is third reactor in which we actually accumulates the lipid titer. So this integrated process has been under optimization in the pilot plant, and based on the current status of the pilot plant, we have found out that if we this pilot plant can use 10 kilogram per day of carbon dioxide, it will produce 5 kilogram per day of acetate, and this acetate gives us 3.3 kilogram per day of algae. From that, we can get 0.8 kilogram per day of biodiesel and 0.8 kilogram per day of omega acid, which is primarily DHA. When we extrapolate it to the commercial plant capacity, which is if we prospect to be 100 metric ton carbon dioxide per year sequestration, we can get 50 metric ton acetate per year and 33 metric ton algae per year. And this will give us 8 metric ton per year DHA and 8 metric ton per year of biodiesel. And the de-oiled biomass is a very good source of protein, which also fetches a value which is about 70 tons per metric ton. So if we calculate the cost, the input cost comes to be 47 million US dollar for sequestering 100 metric ton CO2 per year. And the output revenue, if you see, and project is about 1610 million US dollar. So this whole integrated process presents a very, very good opportunity, and it's already proven at the pilot plant. In the next steps, we are further fine-tuning our pilot plant results, and then we will do a techno-economic studies of the integrated process at normal pressure as well as the high pressure. We will conduct a life cycle analysis studies, and then we have a plan to go for first demo plant, maybe by end of next year. There are several technology benefits which this integrated process provides. There is a carbon recycling and commoditizing of carbon dioxide. There is a production of fuel and food. No issue of food versus fuel. Retention of biodiversity. Economically promising process due to production of valuable omega acids along with the lipids. The commercialization of the process provides energy access, which is competitive biodiesel and affordable nutrition. This is the one of the integrated process where there is no debate about food versus the fuel process. These carbon dioxide streams that are likely to be available for commercial use are the monoethylene glycol plant, which are rich in CO2 gases, the 1D ethanol plant, which releases carbon dioxide gases from molasses-based distillery, the carbon dioxide from the biomethanation plants, and the carbon dioxide from the steam methane reforming process. So this way it provides us with a great opportunity ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martu, for these very exhaustive presentations on also the state of the technology. And there will certainly be very many questions on this subject. So again, I tell the attendees, do not hesitate to ask all your questions in the chat. We will address them at the end of the talks. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
And please do not forget to unshare your screen. And then I will give the word to Diane Dufresne, Director Project Power to Gas Métis-Centre et Haikune, at Storengy. Diane will discuss the utilization of CO2 from an aerobic digestion to make synthetic gas. So now we spoke about the fuels and chemicals in a general way, and Diane will speak about an application that is more specific to CO2 to synthetic gas, natural gas. So Diane, I do not see you here. Maybe you want to share your video as well. Share the screen. Thank you. You are muted, Diane, so please unmute your microphone.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
Do you see my, no, you don't see my presentation.
We see a nice scenery on your.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Ok. Bon, je vais parler en français, hein, comme c'était prévu au
I'm
départ.
going to be speaking in French as planned. So my name is Diane de Defresne. I'm a director of the Power to Gas project led by Storengy, and I'm going to talk about the valuation of CO2 from methanization. So Storengy is the first operator of underground methane. We've got a lot of storage space for natural gas. We've got aquifers, we've got salt cavities, we've got depleted reservoirs. So we store renewable energy. We're not just storing gas. So we work on the green gas development. We're looking at hydrogen in particular, and at different syngases and methane, of course. So our expertise is industrial, and we use it to develop these different projects in order to promote energy transition and promote the use of our different infrastructures based on renewable gases. We're also developing at Storengy geothermal sources, because we have know-how of what we have underground. We develop underground storage facilities for gas. So now I'm going to talk to you about the concept power to gas. Why is this a virtuous project? Well, power to gas, what is it? It's a system. It's a unit that recovers CO2 from methanization. So it's a methanization unit that is fairly traditional. So we recover the CO2 and we do methanization with renewable hydrogen in order to produce synthesized methane, and the biomethane is then injected into the network. And it's the synthesized methane is also injected. So methanization and methanation, we're talking about a virtuous combination, because it's something that helps us to improve carbon yield of the biogas in terms of methane. So it improves it by 55. We go from 55% to over 85%, because methanization produces biogas. This is made up of CH4 to varying degrees. The rest is CO2. So we use the CO2 in the methanization units so that it is used almost 100%. So it really depends on the performance of the methanation. So it makes it possible to produce a 100% renewable syngas. On top of that, the power to gas units can be used to offer services to the grid. The gas infrastructures are fairly flexible. Today, the electrical grid, with the introduction of renewable energies, that are intermittent suffer from different pressures. So it's important to look at the flexibility of gas-based infrastructures to back up the needs of electrical infrastructures by transforming renewable electricity into syngas and using for this the flexibility of gas infrastructures for transport and storage purposes. So once converted, this renewable energy is stored and transported via the network without any adaptation because syn methane is in line with the specifications of the gas infrastructure. So from an environmental point of view, where it's 100% CO2 reuse, the CO2 that's absorbed by the biogas, by the biomass. And from an efficiency point of view, this means that we provide different services and we use a gas that's completely renewable. So this is very logical. So Storengy is developing two projects. The first is called METICenter. It's the first project that was developed. So it's a demonstrator. So we're talking about small volumes to begin with. It's combined with the methanization unit in Angers. So we've got power to gas coupled with methanization. It's close to Célérande in the center of the Val de Loire area. And as well as the methanization unit, it's a small methanization unit, as I've said. We're also going to be installing a power to gas unit made of a 250 kilowatt electrolyzer, where we'll be able to test its performance, its efficiency, because the input of energy is fairly irregular. And there will be catalytic methanization with different efficiency loops to try and recycle gas as much as possible and optimize the use of hydrogen produced on the site. So basically, the unit will produce 50, I think she said 50,000 of green gas. We believe in the development of power to gas, but we also believe in the development of energy hubs, especially the coupling of a power to gas with the possibility of green mobility based on hydrogen on the site itself. So there will be a distribution unit. I'm sorry, the sound has stopped. So we're going to start the building as of next month with the implementation of the electrolysis machine and other parts of the facility. So the distribution of hydrogen, for example, that's planned for September 2021, with implementation of the whole pilot site with methanization, methanation, power to gas, the power to gas unit completely, and injection into the GRTF network via one single injection point. So that will receive the biomethane at the same time as the synmethane. Who are our partners for this project? Well, we've got Arriva H2Gen, so for electrolysis, Chemod for methanation, Storengy. We are the integrators, the OEM, because we're integrating the different technological components of our partners. Codival is working on separation of the gases, and the CEA is working on the two objectives, helping us with the integration and helping us to take measurements. And there's a second generation electrolysis machine also being worked on. We also have an agricultural partner, La Sablière. They help us with the methanation. And then there's the Ciel that is helping us with the overall integration, but also especially, with the hydrogen system. So the objectives of the project to work on this bicarbon hydrogen production in order to provide the grid with services, to use CO2 as far as possible. So we won't be able to do this 100%, but it is a pilot site that will test this reuse of CO2. So we're looking at local hydrogen mobility and regional mobility, and that complexifies matters. And for Storengy, it's very relevant, this way of bringing things together and combining methanization, electrolysis, so that we've got the best possible results. So globally, it's very relevant from a technical point of view, especially from a local perspective. So you can see on the slide what it will look like, this power to gas unit. So most of the site is occupied by the methanization system with the storage of the inputs, and the research and development center is this small square at the entrance to the site. So you can see it doesn't take up too much room. So the second project is Haikune. It's developed in the Yonne department in France. So it's a bit different. The biogas comes from ISDND, from a landfill. So the gas is very specific. We were interested in developing a project with a different kind of biogas. And so we worked with the COVID unit in Saint-Florentin in Yonne. This time we'll have an electrolyzer that will be much bigger because it has a capacity of 1 megawatt. This allows a certain amount of flexibility, up to 2 megawatts, with a biological methanation system. So it's a different kind of methanation technology. So on this site, there's already the production of biomethane. It's been producing biomethane for 2 years. So that's already being injected into the network. So we'll have over 50 nanometers cubed of methane, so green synthesized methane. And we will be producing also 50 nanometers cubed of green synthesized methane. So the work is planned to start in June 2022, and the pilot site will be implemented in February 2023, along with the injection. So hopefully we'll be able to pick up data from a wind farm in the area so that things can be run in real time. In fact, we've gone even further with this project. We're going to draw inspiration from electrical models for producing regional renewable energy. So we're associating our pilot with the production from wind energy in the area. We will develop a PEM electrolysis machine so that we can meet a megawatt demand from the grid. So we've got flexibility, we've got the integration of these power to gas units. This is something that appears important to us, and we'll be producing renewable green gas at the same time. So this flexibility is important for the electrolyzer, but also for the biological methanation unit. So we'll be producing syn methane, which will be directly injected onto the grid, the national grid. So we wanted to have a bigger project for store energy. We wanted to integrate this retrofit unit and adapt it to local needs. We wanted to then be able to copy this model, apply the model to other units with different sources of biogas. Our partners, Engie Green. So Engie Green is part of Engie. They're in charge of developing renewable energies in France, wind energy, but also photovoltaic energy, Arriva H2Gen. So they will be in charge of providing the PM electrolyzer and working on its flexibility with our local partner, SDE and Yonne Energy, who are also working on the integration side of things and on the electrolyzer. The methanation machine will be developed by our research and development entity, inside Engie. And then we have a local partner the FC Lab, working on the technical and economic modeling of this kind of process. Waga Energy is the operator of the biogas purifier on the site, and COVED is the operator of the storage site. So in terms of potential, well, we think that there's a lot of potential for power-to-gas systems. I'm sorry. So we need to have sources that are well developed in Europe. So it's important to have market data on methanization. I'm sorry, the sound keeps cutting out. So in Europe, we've got 660 units, methanization units, so that's quite a lot. And in France, we saw an increase, a 73% increase with biomethane being injected onto the grid. So we should be able to inject just as much syn methane. So we're looking at a big increase of injection of such gases into the network, but it represents less than 1% of all of the methane that is on the network. So there's still an awful lot of development potential there. In France, this is what we can see on the right-hand side of the slide. So today there are methanization reservoirs that can be exploited in France. In 2030, we estimate that there's a potential of 132 million tons for methanization. So biomass that can be methanized for a volume of 56 terawatt hours that could be injected into the network. So this is so this corresponds to the potential development of 46 terawatt hours of syn methane. And then the prospects in France, presented by the ADEME for 2015, would be 46 terawatt hours, 140 of renewable gas from power-to-gas systems. So these are the predictions. So one last point about synthesized methane. Synthesized methane is a green methane. It has network specifications. This means that it's possible to reduce the carbon footprint, to recycle CO2 from a methanization unit. Again, this is something that was absorbed by the biomass to begin with. It's also a virtuous circle. There's just something missing for it to be properly developed, and that is production development mechanisms. Today, we don't have any synthesized methane status. So we need to have support for producing this gas that is 100% renewable. Thank you. Thank you very much.
On CO2 to methane, and it was a very good complement to what sorry, I was muted. I'm not sure if you heard the first part. So again, thank you very much, Diane. I think it was a very.
I'm sorry, I can't access the interpreting.
May I ask you to unshare your screen, Diane, please? Good, thank you very much. And now we have discussed about the different routes, so CO2 to chemicals, CO2 to fuels, including CO2 to methane. But there are the third routes that we didn't discuss much this morning and not at all today. It's CO2 to mineralization. So how can we store CO2 in building materials? So I will give the word now to Paola Carey from Carbon 8 Systems. So she's CTO at Carbon 8 System in the UK, and she will present how CO2 can be captured permanently by turning industrial residues into construction products. And again, I invite everyone to ask your question in the chat. And maybe I can ask Diane to have a little look in the chat because you had some specific questions about your talk there. So Paola, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Cecile. And thank you very much, everybody, for the invite. And as usual, I seem to come to a lot of these conferences and fly the flag for mineralization. So I want to talk to you about how we are using CO2 from industrial sources to turn industrial residues into construction products. Oops. Oh, sorry, that's better. So just to explain what we're talking about in terms of mineralization, we at Carbonate like to call it accelerated carbonation technology, but you probably hear it called mineralization as well. And the mineralization of CO2 is a natural process. Carbon dioxide will react with rocks. It will react with industrial residues using the CO2 from the atmosphere, but it takes a long time. It's a geological process. But if you change the environment at which you're interacting, mixing the CO2 with the residues, principally by increasing the concentration of the CO2, but also changing the temperature and moisture content conditions, you can accelerate that natural process into a process that takes a matter of minutes. So there are a whole variety of minerals that are reactive to carbon dioxide, and those in thermal residues in particular are magnesium and calcium silicates, oxides and hydroxides. And you can think of it very simply in terms of the reaction of calcium oxide plus CO2 to give calcium carbonate. But there are a few intermediaries, but basically that's the really very straightforward chemical reaction that we're looking at. When you form the calcium carbonate or the carbonate, you can get both amorphous and crystalline carbonates, and that's being developed further in other applications of carbonation. The reaction is exothermic, so it very importantly, it does not require large amounts of energy to make the transformation. The carbonate formation reduces the pH of the system. So in a lot of these thermal residues, we have contaminants such as lead, zinc, and copper, which are stabilized very readily in the carbonation process because both through formation of a cement, so solidification, and also through reducing the pH of the system. As I said, the reaction can take just a few minutes, 15 to 20 minutes when it's managed. And if you manipulate the reaction, you can produce a variety of valuable products. And of course, if you're forming carbonate, you're permanently capturing the CO2. The only way the carbonate will be released is by either high temperature. You need temperatures in excess of 800 degrees to drive off the CO2, or by placing the carbonate in an acid environment. The picture on the right it illustrates our eureka moment and how we came into the accelerated carbonation world. My colleague Colin Hills was stabilizing some heavy metal contaminated waste forms with cement, and he noticed that well, it was poisoned. The hydration of the cement was poisoned by the presence of the heavy metals. But if he exposed it to CO2, almost immediately he got a hardened product. So in the bottom right here, you can see bright cement grains with a rim of darker material where the carbon dioxide has sucked the calcium out of the cement grain and redeposited it as a series of needles into the void space within the residue. Those needles are illustrated in the top photomicrograph, where you can see the little polymorphs of calcium carbonate, and it's the interlocking of those needles that give the material its strength. So the benefits of the technology, it's very much a solution that is predicated on the avoidance of sending these industrial residues to landfill and therefore saving on the cost of landfill. You get a safe and permanent capture of the CO2, and then you're manufacturing products that you can sell. So typical treatment costs are between 25 and 30 pounds per tonne of residue treated. So a lot of people talk about mineralization and say, well, it's only a small scale CO2 capture potential. But I think there's a lot of work out there that illustrates that the total amount of CO2 that could be sequestered through mineralization is in excess of, well, the GCI, the Global Carbon Institute, suggests over 3.5 gigatons through the formation of aggregates or use of CO2 in concrete. Our estimate of using our technology on the various waste streams is in excess of 1 million tons per year of CO2 that could be sequestered. That's excluding the huge piles of legacy wastes that are available. But it does include residues that have other applications. So we would have to dedicate all the cement waste or the biomass ashes to carbonation if we were going to achieve the figures that you can see for each of the waste forms down at the bottom there in blue. Some of these symbols for the industries that we're looking at are highlighted in blue, and these are the ones that carbonate systems are concentrating on at the moment and developing solutions. But I want to talk, just because we're at a bio conference, want to talk a little bit about our work on biomass ash, which is still at the laboratory stage, but we think has some really interesting social and economic potentials. So most people, when they think of biomass ash, think about CHP plants where you're burning woody residues. A whole variety of woods, both waste and virgin wood, are burnt for power, for electricity. And the carbon dioxide reactivity of those residues is very much related to the type of tree that it's burnt, that's being burnt, or the type of wood, and also even down to which part of the wood is burnt, whether it's the bark or the core of the tree. So we've been looking at other sorts of agricultural residues that are problematic. So you can see in the examples here, we've got a whole variety of different nutshells, peels from things like oranges or pomegranates, potatoes, and then the variety of more fibrous materials such as hemp, flax, and hay. And we've been looking at the carbon dioxide uptake of these materials. They're generally produced in high volume, and more than 2 gigatons per year are unused and sent to landfill or burnt in the fields in an uncontrolled fashion, obviously generating CO2 as you do that. Many of these ashes are reactive to CO2, up to 30% by weight of the ash, which is a relatively high uptake compared with some of the other industrial residues that we've been looking at. And we've found that we can form well-cemented monoliths, so that's using the ash on their own, but we think there's other potential for using these ashes that have been carbonated as supplementary cementitious materials. So down at the bottom left here, you can see a photomicrograph of an almond shell that's been carbonated. Again, you can see rims of carbonate forming on the outside of the other particles within the ash, and also some silica phases which are left over. On the right, you can see the different uptakes of the different materials over different periods, and you can see hemp, for example, is very reactive, as are many of the shells, and also some unusual things like potatoes and bananas and those sorts of soft peeled materials. The top shows the strength that you can gain by making these materials into monoliths. So effectively, sorry, hopefully you can still see my slides. Yeah, let's go on to the next one. Yeah, so we think about the conceptual model for adding value to biomass. As I say, there are gigatons of these sorts of materials produced, and most of them are unmanaged, so rotting in the fields or burning, and so leading to either filling up landfill space or CO2 emissions. If you take things like nuts, they're very difficult to digest or use in as fertilizers. But if you ash them, you're obviously going to gain the electricity, the power from the burning process, and then there is the potential to reuse the CO2 that you produce by burning them back into the ashes, and then using those ashes to replace cements. So we think that in this sort of conceptual model, we can offset total CO2 by in the order of 0.1 gigaton of CO2 per year. So the system that we're using is very much what's called a dry carbonation. So we use atmospheric temperatures and pressures to carbonate the materials. There are other companies who are using much higher water solid ratios and getting precipitated calcium carbonate, but we use atmospheric temperatures and pressures because it makes the whole engineering of the process much easier to manage. As I said, we developed the system from the modification of cement stabilization, treating hazardous wastes. And we first commercialized the technology in 2010 via license for the treatment of the lime residues from energy from waste flue gas treatment. And currently there are 3 plants in the UK treating those APCRs using pure CO2 delivered in a tanker. So it's waste CO2 collected from, for example, fertilizer factories. But more recently, Carbonate Systems has developed the technology to use the CO2 directly from a flue gas. And our first commercial deployment has been with the VCAT cement group in France. This has been the result of a successive range of demonstrators. The first one in 2018 in Ontario, funded by the Ontario Solutions 2020 Challenge. And you can see the capture of the CO2 here, flue gas from the cement works, about 10, 12%, and the going into the system and coming out of the system in a batch process, the reduction in CO2 concentration. So you can see the amount of CO2 captured. The plant that operated in this situation was a prototype, usually rather manual. So we did a second demonstration in the UK at a Hanson cement plant in 2019, funded by the Innovate UK government funding, which allowed us to automate the plant and then develop the full commercial plant that is now installed at the VCAT group. This picture illustrates a nice sunny day in VCAT. What it doesn't illustrate is the direct CO2 capture, but this big steel pipe on the top right of the photograph is the flue stack from the cement works, and our container is positioned so we can simply plug into the flue gas, take a bypass of the gas, extract the CO2 from it, and then the remaining flue gas goes back into the flue stack. So we can take a range of thermal residues, diverting them from landfill and manufacturing materials for the construction industry. Principally, we're manufacturing an aggregate that goes into concrete blocks. But in some residues, we can make a carbonated product that is useful for fertilizer, depending on the chemistry of the residues. It does have potential to provide supplementary cementitious materials from biomass residues to replace cement and produce building products with low or negative embodied carbon. The aggregate produced by the VCAT cement works has a carbon footprint in the order of minus 20 kilos per tonne. To progress this technology, we need to, as previous speakers have said in the last session, we need an agreed carbon footprint labelling to support the use of these low carbon products. We need tax incentives and the value for the CO2. incentives to recover the waste and process the waste materials, particularly reprocessing existing waste piles. Treating agricultural waste, such as the ones I've outlined earlier, has significant social and environmental benefits because you're providing both energy for the communities, reusing their wastes, and also providing them with building materials, replacing some really very horrid carbon-intensive processes such as brick making, and it's very famous around Delhi, all the black smoker brickworks. So we're currently looking for other biomass residues which have both high ash contents and CO2 reactivity. So any suggestions greatly appreciated. Thank you. Just at the bottom there, we've got some references for the work we're doing in the laboratory on the biomass waste.
Thank you very much, Paula. This was a very interesting overview on what we can do with CO2 to create building materials. I already have some burning questions for you, but I will first start maybe with the first panelist, but I would like to ask all panelists to come back on stage if you can switch on your video and microphones. Thank you very much, and thank you to you all. So again, I remind the audience, you can ask questions still. I know we are keeping track of it during this session. Now we will have 20 minutes of discussion. And I would like to start with Babette. I mean, generally, we all discussed about the product that we could make out of CO2, but one big question is, what do we need to make this, to put this product on the market? So we need to have a favorable policy framework, we need market incentives, but we also need to have public acceptance. And for example, there was very little scientific studies on public acceptance on CCU in general, because it's not very well known from the general public. So my general question, and not only to Babette, maybe to all of you, is how can we increase the public acceptance? How can we make people buy CO2 products? Because, for example, we see quite some people who are afraid to sleep on mattresses made out of CO2, while they do drink some sodas where you have CO2, but this is not always well understood. And so, Babette, what do you think about it? One of the answers would be to make labels, and you talk a bit about it, but what do you think should be the steps there, and how could we make labels according to you?
Right. Well, thank you for the question. Perhaps I'll have a first stab at it since you asked me specifically. I think, as you said last, obviously labeling number one is education, and that takes many different forms. And in terms of labeling, obviously that is the direct information a consumer receives about the contents of a product, on the product itself. So that's the closest to the consumer. But there's obviously a lot of work that needs to take place in terms of what kind of labels, what information on the labels, how do these different labels be comparable. And I understand, well, certainly the Renewable Carbon Initiative led by the Nova Institute is starting work on that. I'm not familiar with other efforts, but there are increasing number of articles coming out about carbon labeling and the importance of those to different brands and different retailers, as well as consumers. So we need help from industry associations and various initiatives, and probably policy help. There's also work, I think, at the Commission's level on bio-labeling more specifically. And all that will help. But as you talked earlier, so that's the first thing, really education and getting the information out there to the consumers and on the product. I think the second thing you were saying is there's a certain amount of fear that we have heard about in terms of things like CO2 being used in mattresses on which people sleep, of course. I think the comment there really is that it depends on the product. I would say our preliminary feedback from the marketplace, from our downstream partners in regard to the recycled carbon polymers that go into things like bottles and fibers for textiles has been, again, it's early days, but positively viewed. And I think we owe that a little bit to the perception of recycled plastics as being good and better than the use of virgin plastics. So just two comments on that.
Yeah. And if I can just because I think it's interesting also, if we go one step further, so on the idea to create proteins out of CO2 to create food, this is also, I think, really a big step further for the consumers. Do you have some feedback on that?
You're speaking to me?
Yeah, to you, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I have been involved in that previously. I think people understand, or the public understands, the need for alternative protein. You're right, you're talking there, and I'll probably leave it to Anshu to speak more about this. But so I think in that sense, it's viewed positively, and the story is a simple one. We need to feed the world, the population is growing to 10 billion, we need alternative sources of protein. However, I actually don't have any data that would suggest consumer feedback on the use of CO2 specifically for those alternative proteins. So perhaps I can hand over to Anshu to comment on that.
Thank you very much, Babette. So yes, Dr. Mathieu, do you have any comment on that?
The microbial protein and the microbial food, which are omega acids, and this, they are now recognized, and they are approved. There are approvals for at least omega acids to be used as a food supplements in the nutraceuticals, in the pharmaceuticals, and infant formulas particularly. So it's already approved. There are examples of approvals. Microbial protein specifically is gaining importance though, but I think very soon it will also get approvals for use.
Okay, and do you have some feedback really from downstream from this chain, so from the consumer part? Or do you make any studies or on that?
No, right now we don't make any studies, but it is already, there is so much awareness now in the public, particularly about the omega acids. It is because it is a component now of almost everything we eat as the supplement, as a health supplement. It is already there. Second reason is that this is a microbial source. So earlier today also it is the fish oil is the main market, but slowly there's a depletion of the fishes. There are some issues of microbial metal contaminations in the fish, metal accumulation in the fish, which might and for the vegans this microbial food source is becoming very, very popular.
Okay, thank you very much. I think for power to gas and for mineralization, this is a very other kind of story, because we don't really, I mean, the public acceptance of using renewable methane, because we could call it maybe like this, or synthetic methane, will be different. I think there the question is more to have a standardization. So what kind of gas and can we accept, and what kind of gas can be injected in the gas network? So Diane, do you have some comments on that? Where are we in terms of standardization now concerning power to methane?
Okay, we are currently working with the regulator of France to have a better regulation for e-methane or synthetic methane. Currently, without the pilot and without demonstrating the quality of the synthetic methane, we are not able to have the acceptance by the regulatory authority to develop such projects. So we are passing through the pilot, and this is why Storengy is taking this development also, because we think that we need to develop the acceptance and to work with the regulatory authority to give them confidence.
Oh, I think at least I do not see Diane anymore moving.
And the quality of the product. For the two products, we are just do you hear me?
It was you were frozen for a moment. Maybe you can switch off your camera, Diane, if the connection is not good.
Okay, sorry. Okay, better. So
you can get back 1 minute ago. Maybe.
Okay, so we are currently working with a regulatory authority. We just request a derogation for the two projects, Méticentre and Haikune project, in order to be able and to have the permission to inject into the distribution network. We should have this derogation. It will be published in a few days. So to allow us to, together with the operator of the distribution network, work on the possibility to inject. So for medicines, it's not a problem. For Haikune neither, but we are not so near so close to the day of the injection. So that's why we are working on medicine first. And the second point is that regarding, we will be able to inject and we will have the permission. Then we need to work on a mechanism to help to standardize the different synthetic methane production. And it seems that it's important to have a derogation on the price that we could have and the revenue we have. So we are working on mechanism to develop a regulation for the synthetic methane.
Okay.
Also.
Thank you very much, Diane. I think, Paula, you were raising your hand.
Yes, I was going to talk about the problem of acceptance of materials in the construction industry, because the builders, the construction people tend to be very conservative, and they like to have seen use of materials for 25 years before they will accept them. So there needs to be more drivers to encourage the construction industry to use low carbon materials. I think that's coming because particularly the cement industry are very driven at the moment to lower their carbon footprint and be seen to lower their carbon footprint. So I think that is all coming on stream. But the problem with when you're treating residues, and it's interesting to know whether the same applies in the biogas industry. If you're starting off with wastes and you're making things from waste, you have a problem with the regulator allowing you to declare it as a product. Or do you still have to have waste management legislation associated with it, which is a real problem if you're making a building material and it still has to have a waste management control. So does the same apply in the methane and biogas world?
Question to Diane, I guess. Could you hear it, Diane?
Yes, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Does the problem of waste legislation apply?
Okay, it's not direct linked to the waste. Well, a little bit for the project we have on the landfill. It's more linked, but it's not directly linked. It's more regarding the regulator want to have 100% sure that there is no impact on the infrastructure. And this is the first point. And the second point, he want to have something that is competitive because it doesn't want to give mechanism to a system that is very expensive. So we industrial are working on the competitivity together with the technology providers because we need to increase the competitivity of the production of hydrogen. So it's passing through a good price of the electricity. And I saw a question regarding that. It's something that we are working on OPEX and CAPEX, but it's not directly linked to the waste management unless for the permitting of the plant. That can be complicated due to the fact that we are developing on a landfill a power to gas project.
Thank you, Diane. So now I would like to ask again a more general question. So CCU technologies are emerging technologies, and in some minds, people think it will be technologies for later, which I think the presentation you did today really showed that CCU is happening now, and a lot of things technologically at least are ready now. So I would like to ask Babette, what do you, if you have to give a bit of vision of what will be the state of the art in terms of CCU product in 2025, 2030, and 2050, I don't know, on different time scale. How do you think, from your point of view, from LanzaTech point of view, this will evolve?
Well, I mean, the first statement I want to make is that we need all these solutions that have been talked about today. I mean, there is no one solution that is going to meet the needs. And it's very encouraging, we feel, to hear the Commission now recognizing that, that all these technologies need to be brought to scale economically to contribute to the targets. And as you can see from our approach, I mean, it's a phased approach. And someone said it this morning in one of the CCU presentations, you know, start where it's the easiest. And we started with steel off gases at LanzaTech, just because carbon monoxide is a very good source for us. And that gas composition is well suited to our microbes. But we know that there is also a significant need for direct capture of the CO2 all the way through to direct air capture itself, and are working on that. So I think what we're going to see going forward in the next 5, 10, 20 years and beyond is progression of technology, innovation, scale building, economies of scale coming. But having said that, the policy framework is going to be absolutely critical, and that remains uncertain for some applications in some member states, even at the European level. So on a technology side, and actually even on a market side, I think we see a favorable field for CCU. More concerns actually on the policy side, on legislation and the impact that that will have, potentially slowing things down. We will get there economically, it's just a question of time. And it's very exciting to see so many alternatives being developed in parallel.
Thank you very much, Babette. I think it's a very important statement. And also to say that, especially in the EU, the supporting framework in terms of funding also is now really including CCU clearly in the Innovation Fund in Europe, Horizon Europe. So it's really going the right direction, but indeed we need a push now on the policy side, and we need to work together in that direction. And Dr. Mathieu, for the technologies, you gave different, quite a broad picture, quite detailed picture, but now if I have to ask you in 2 minutes to really summarize what are the key barriers now and what are the barriers that we should lift to allow for the technologies you presented to go further. And quickly further.
There are technology barriers in the sense that when we are going for a scale up and translation, it is an integration of a anaerobic process in which there is no oxygen required and aerobic process where there is oxygen required. So it poses a lot of challenges how to remove oxygen when it is coming from the gas fermentation process, and then how to recycle this oxygen and how to recycle this carbon dioxide. These are the technology barriers, which during the scale up and demonstration will be solving it. And these are the main technology barriers. This is the integration of two different, and there is no example in the world of such integration. And we have demonstrated it in our pilot scale level already. That is the main technology.
Okay, thank you very much. And now another subject that is also often broad when it comes to CCU is when we speak about CO2 mineralization. We say that CO2 is permanently stored in building material, which is also clearly stated in life cycle analysis in scientific literature. But one question that comes from the general public is often to say, like, there are chemical erosions on building materials, and what will happen with the CO2 then? And will the CO2 from the atmosphere, in fact, react with this? And I wanted to know if Paola could comment on that.
I think on the whole, with carbonated mineralized products, the benefits are that they continue to absorb CO2. It's an interesting question because a long time ago, people who made concrete always worried about the carbonation, because eventually the carbonation front gets to the steel inside the concrete and you get corrosion of the concrete. So it was always thought of as a bad thing. But nowadays, everybody thinks of it as a good thing because it's capturing the carbon dioxide all the time. Obviously, if you've carbonated things already, that amount of CO2 being continually absorbed is smaller, but even our products are continuing to absorb carbon dioxide in their lifetime. There is an issue about thinking about the recycling of the materials. So what happens when you demolish the building? But in that case, you're just reducing the grading and hopefully reusing the material in another application. So again, the carbon dioxide still continues to be locked in as the calcium carbonate.
Thank you very much. And when do you think that technically, or do you have goals in the future to use direct air capture to do mineralization?
from our point of view, we don't mind where the CO2 comes from. Although it's interesting, there is an abundance of CO2, and one of the things we need to have together is the residue and the CO2, because once you have to transport the CO2, it's more difficult. But if you can set up an air capture unit where there's a residue that perhaps not a direct source of CO2, then that would be ideal. And you can think of things like mining wastes and the big stockpiles of these industrial residues where air capture would be a brilliant solution.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I would like to finish with a conclusion now with Diane, asking about, you discussed what we'll also discuss now, the mechanism, the support mechanism that you will need to deploy CO2 to methane at larger scale. Can you give a few examples of these mechanisms? You are mute, Diane. Yeah.
Okay. Do you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
there were some mechanisms that has been developed when at the beginning of the biomethane, and nowadays we are speaking about 2 projects, and what we would like to have is a derogation on the tariff for these 2 projects in order to be able to continue our experimentation and to be able to work really on the competitiveness of the products, because I think it's one more time, it's really key to show to the regulators that we are producing a competitive product and that the industry can also develop some innovation and some R&D and some optimization of the system in order to produce cheaper hydrogen, cheaper capex for the whole pilot. And then we can go to development of industrial and commercial projects, because as Babette said, there are a lot of industrial companies that are interested by products that are renewable products and that are with a low CO2 impact.
Okay.
So I think the market is there. So we need the regulator to work on it, and not. And what is very important is that we need to do it quickly.
That's a very good point. And I think Babette want to jump on that.
I just want to build on what Diane said, and also you reminded me, Celia, about the European Innovation Fund. Of course, no one has yet mentioned, I don't think, money. Finance. We must have been somewhere else, because of course that's absolutely fundamental to accelerating the deployment of CCU, funding and financing, and for any of our projects, I think it's a very good sign, again, that the Commission is coming forward with financing vehicles like the Innovation Fund, which really can make a difference to scale up of these technologies, because so much money has been put into the innovation and the research and development. I think we're seeing the output of that now, but now we really need to see more money, both private and public, going into scale up to get these technologies to a point of commercialization.
Thank you very much, Babette. I think this is a very good conclusion point. And so really showing that CCU is happening now. It's an emerging technology that things are going very fast. So we have now more and more funding opportunities to allow for CCU projects to be developed at national and international scales. And I also want to say again that the EU money is also available for outside Europe, and people, as soon as the plants are being implanted in Europe. But that's really show that we need also international corporations. The technology are there. So now I think everything is there. We need a favorable policy framework to help in that direction. So I think this is the big conclusion. And also to show that we can do more or less everything with CO2. That has been shown in the different presentations. So mostly all the different type of materials and chemicals we have around us. So this is a very important point. So I would like to thank you very much for this very interesting session, very interesting talks, very complementary, and also this very interesting discussion. And I would like also to ask all the attendees and the organizers. It was a very nice idea to create these 2 CCU sessions. And I wish you all a very nice afternoon. And hopefully you have a nicer weather in your country than we have in Belgium. So all the best to everybody and enjoy the day.
Thank you, Celia.
Thank you, Celia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Paul.